All right, you guys know the deal. No chat means offline recorded segment means I didn't stream today. I just got the booster shot the other day, and my head feels like soup, and I really don't want to stream. But I did have a thought in my head that I wanted to record because it's important and it's timely. Um, so when I started doing the YouTube thing, in the beginning of 2019, which is pretty late to the game by a lot of people's standards, there was a problem that I had with a lot of the online left with regards to how they structured their arguments, and it was really, really frustrating for me. I'm reminded specifically of an interaction that I saw in an online forum. Um, this was a while back, and it wasn't even big content creators, but I think it sets the tone, okay? And it was a lefty subreddit, I think, and there was a person there who was really upset because they felt like their political allies ceded too much ground in arguments pertaining to women's rights and trans people and stuff like that. They were saying that it's BS that men on average are stronger than women. Now, of course, that's ridiculous. Men on average are stronger than women. We're talking about cis people here, but most people are cis, so that rounds out the average bit. And people in the thread were trying to talk them down a little bit, like, hey, come on, you can advocate for women's rights without, like, pretending that there's no difference in average strength between a man and a woman, but they wouldn't hear it. They thought it was like this big myth. And I mean, of course it's not, and people in the thread had a good laugh, but I see stuff like this a lot on the left, and I saw a big instance of it recently with the debate that I had, if you can even call it that, with Noncompete. And I'll get to that example last, but one of the big issues that I have with the online left and how they structure their arguments is that they frame ethical arguments in a way which presupposes something that isn't true or something that could become not true really easily, right? So an example of this would be like, oftentimes racists will say that, 1350, like black people commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime in the United States, and they'll either say outright or kind of imply that this means black people are like inherently more violent or whatever. And I think the good response to this is to research the history of crime in the United States and gentrification and redlining and a bunch of other crap and go like, oh yeah, black people do commit more violent crime proportionally in the United States. So what? Like, you'd expect that. Like, look at these historical trends. Like, this has nothing to do with how black people are inherently. This is like the inevitable consequence of centuries of discrimination, of white flight leaving black people kind of on their own and underfunded in the middle of cities, of the drug war, which really escalated things and made it so that a bunch of people in those inner cities could only really make a living off the drug trade, which gangs formed around, and gangs fought over territory because that is a thing that gangs do, and that leads to a lot of gun death and etc. Understand the system. And then even if a racist hits you with that crazy 1350 stat, you can be like, so, you can, like, you can stone cold them. Like, okay, what do you think that means? The bad response is to say that the 1350 thing isn't, like, true at all. Like, there is no disproportionate amount of crime committing. Um, you know, Now, sure, racists will exaggerate it and they'll infer and imply the wrong things from it. But if your argument is like, hey, racism is bad because black people don't even commit a disproportionate amount of crime, then all it really takes is a couple of empirical studies to suddenly, in your worldview, justify racism. And that's really, really bad. I've seen the same thing done with race and IQ studies, for example. There is absolutely no, and I mean this, no conclusive evidence on any race of humans being inherently smarter than any other. The results are inconclusive, and every single year, additional research seems to bring more and more weight to the side of the argument which says that differences in average IQ are a product of environment. You know, there used to be a huge gap between the Irish and the English back in the 50s, I think, and that got sorted out pretty much completely with time. There are still huge gaps in America today between the races in terms of educational attainment, you know? The average black person in America might have a lower IQ than the average white person in America, but they also have less education, and education affects IQ massively, right? I mean, like, right? And Nigerian immigrants tend to have a higher IQ than the average white person because the process of immigration selects for the kinds of people who have the education and wealth to move to a whole new country. There's so much incredible nuance lurking behind the dog whistles. And if you can learn that nuance, right, you can be so much better at fighting those arguments. And for so long, I saw a lot of people on the left, not all, I mean, this wasn't like a total problem, but a lot of them, they would not engage with that nuance and instead just dogmatically refuse to accept evidence that at the face of it makes them look bad, but when examined a little bit, doesn't. So I bring us now to the most recent example. I'm being called a Nazi on Twitter right now, which isn't anything new. And I'm not like bringing this up to like defend myself post hoc because I don't need defense and I'm flawless and I've never made a mistake. But in the non-compete debate, here's a little clip to just give the necessary context. It's a little bit edited, but I mean it gets the gist across. I mean we're just looking at like
the freedom,
some basic context here. So I was trying to use the Socratic method to test the validity of non-compete's ethical system, and then
to
we
do with
here.
that exploit
Reasons why I feel Marxism is worth following.
but there's no.
This isn't a matter of idealism. It's a matter of understanding why we fight for what we fight for. What you're arguing for is intuitive morality, which is exactly what leads to every goddamn pogrom and mass slaughter that's ever happened throughout history. When people post hoc justify what's right or wrong, only the construction of and adherence to moral systems that you can understand can prevent that kind of stuff from happening. And it's why I'm hammering on it right now. I don't like it when you're...
And the only way to the freedom.
Oh, wait, sorry, that didn't have the bit. We're talking about what I agree.
Marx and Engels.
Freedom to oppress others.
Bad to write. Vaush.
Wait, I thought this had the bit in it. Oh my god. What the hell? Okay, hold on. That just had the bit giving the context. I need the drop. I need the line drop. Hi, Progressive, what are you doing? Not getting the line drop in? Oh my god. Here we go. The actual video.
Versus calling somebody
not utilitarian. Proportionate number of Jewish
ideology was not aligned with reality.
Utilitarian.
The point is that their ideology was not aligned with reality.
How can you tell?
Because Jews don't actually control banks in the world.
There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic.
All right, Vaush, we're done here. Thank you. Goodbye. This is
And then he left, right? Okay. So on the face of it, I think that there's nothing like wrong with this, right? I mean, apart from him, he's quite stupid, I think. But the point here was he says, well, why were the Nazis wrong? The Nazis were wrong because the Jews didn't really control the banks, which is a weird answer to me because the logical follow-through to that would be, so if they did control the banks, would that have made the Nazis right? And I think that's kind of what his ethical system was getting at there. Now, I'm not saying that non-compete actually justifies the Holocaust. I'm saying that I don't think he can explain why the Holocaust is bad. Because look, the matters of his lack of an ethical system are for. I mean, you can watch the debate if you want, but the critical thing here is that for me saying that there was a disproportionate amount of Jewish control of the banks in the Weimar Republic, a bunch of people online are calling me a Nazi. Like everywhere, it's like a whole meme thing. And the weird thing is, as I understood when going into the debate, and then have looked into and have found that yes, this is the case, there was. And the question that I pose to people who have an issue with me saying that is, do you think that makes the Nazis right? Like, there are historical factors that led to that, right? Jews are a widely persecuted group today, have been for thousands of years. In Europe, they were often expelled from countries. They had to move from place to place. They often stayed in cities because that allowed them the infrastructure to sort of stick together and avoid being hate crimed 24/7, only 23/7. Get that extra hour break. And they tended to go into fields that would provide them some degree of security and safety. They commercial fields gave them money to travel when needed, which is important when you're always at risk of being killed. Their religion, Judaism, prioritizes education as a value. Trust me, if you ever met a rabbi, these are very learned people. Okay, I grew up around a bunch of them. Okay, they they like their books. It's just a cultural prioritization. So all that combined led to a lot of them being in commercial industries, and there was a lot of Jewish representation in the banking system. That doesn't justify what the Nazis did. And when I see memes like this, here's on the dank left, when you say it's not okay that Vaush shared Nazi era anti-Semitic slander on stream, Tanky VDS, or when I see this on another one, Vaush is on their way to explain how Vaush was right about the Jews controlling a disproportionate amount of banks in Weimar Germany. This is really weird to me because what it's telling me is, first of all, that I guess a lot of people seem to believe that the only reason the Nazis were wrong was because there wasn't a sufficient amount of Jewish control. Like for you guys, I ask you, like, what percentage of Jewish involvement in banks would be necessary for you to justify the Holocaust? Like, is that where you draw your line? For me, you could go to 100%. Pardon me for taking a brave stance here, but I still think the Holocaust would be bad in that situation. But I understood this to be a fairly uncontroversial historical fact. A lot of this could just be attributed to people just blindly hating me, and I think that is I think that's explanatory in a lot of ways, because people just seem to get stupider when they dislike me. It just seems to drag them down mentally. I guess that could just be a part of it, but the issue that I have here is that there are people who are going to see those memes and they're going to learn from them, and these people are going to be very ill-equipped to deal with arguments pertaining to that subject and other related subjects in the future. I get very uncomfortable imagining a left where you're having an argument with a Nazi, and Nazism's on the rise right now, in some ways at least. So these are things that we might have to contend with. Tucker Carlson's screaming about white genocide, on his massively viewed show. I don't think this is something we can afford to have like no good arguments against. And I'm just worried the idea of people on the left, like, you're arguing with a Nazi, and the Nazi's like, we were right about everything, and the person on the left is like, no, you're not, because there was no disproportionate Jewish control. And then what do you think the Nazis going to do? They're going to prove that there was. And then what are you going to do? Stumble backwards? Deny reality? Like, what? I've seen this happen in arguments about race, where lefties will commit to this like really weird reality warping view that all of the existing information on crime or IQ or whatever doesn't exist, and I think it's just a substitute for engaging with the nuance of the subject. It's very, very frustrating for me. I mean, obviously it's a bit frustrating to be smeared as a Nazi for repeating an incredibly common and uncontroversial historical fact, but more to it though, it just makes me think, like, is there actually an interest in defeating these arguments, or do we just like ignore things that seem inconvenient to us? Don't cede them that ground. If you aren't willing to contend with reality, the ground you're ceding to them is, once you accept reality, our worldview naturally follows. Other people who are on the fence about being racist or Nazi or whatever, when they see the counter-arguments involve ignoring reality, all they're going to think is, wow, the left literally can't accept reality. They're delusional. No wonder we're right. That's what they think. And they talk about it all the time. The Chad response, the most effective response, not just to win the debate, but to change the minds of real people, to actually affect the discourse that takes place, is to acknowledge reality and then have the next argument. But a lot of people on the left can't do that. That's one of the reasons I started the channel, and it's very disappointing to see these patterns get fallen into day after day. Now, this isn't to say, of course, that any circumstance where a person is saying, Jews had disproportionate control of the banks in the Weimar Republic can't be racist or anti-Semitic or a dog whistle. If it's being done in a way which implies, the sort of Jewish question or whatever, Like, obviously, you can contend with that. Same with people going 1350, 1350. But that wasn't the case in the discussion that we were having. I was just curious as to whether or not non-compete's ethical system could contend with a claim like that, and or acknowledge or deal with. I mean, just can you imagine? Yeah, like if I had been talking with non-compete about like racism, and I was like, "So non-compete, why do you think racism is bad?" And non-compete was like, "Because they're wrong. Black people don't commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime." If you can't see how a counter argument like that doesn't open up a ton of holes in our ability to deal with reality, change people's minds, and argue our positions, then I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, those were my thoughts. I love you guys. I'll be back from my booster shot related unwellness soon. Take care.